Alright folks, welcome back to the shop here. What I have for you today is a pretty classic 22 rifle. It is the Marlin Model 60, also the Glenfield Model 60, they're the same one. As a matter of fact, this is a Glenfield. But they're the same exact rifle, it doesn't really matter. This gun came from its predecessor, the Marlin Model 99. It's been in continuous production since 1960. They still make them. They're relatively inexpensive. They are now produced by Remington Arms in Mayfield, Kentucky. Used to be made by Marlin Firearms Company in North Haven, Connecticut. It's a tube-fed semi-automatic gun. There is a magazine-fed version of it called the Marlin Model 795. Just has a detachable box magazine here, and the Model 99 was developed in '59 by Ewald Nickel. Internally, they're basically identical guns, not a whole lot of difference on them, but the Model 99s had nicer walnut stocks, were drilled and tapped on top of the receivers here instead of this little dovetail that's cut, or actually in this case they're kind of cast in and then machined out. Not a whole lot different. There was a 99G, which is just the Glenfield version of the 99. The Model 60 came about in 1960 off of the 99. It uses birchwood stocks instead of walnut. Another thing that they changed that Marlin kind of went back to was using brass inner magazine tubes. The ones that were steel typically would they would rust up and they just quit working. Constantly having to replace them, and they were real susceptible to rust. And everything else, and this one's kind of gooey. So they went back to brass, and that's the way they've stayed the whole time. The barrels on them are what Marlin called their micro groove technology. It has 16 what they called micro grooves in it. It's got a 1 in 16 twist rate with a pretty decent little crown on the barrel. Nothing special, but they took the time to do it nice. The idea behind that made them, in some people's opinion, a little bit better and a little more accurate rifling technology was because it deforms the bullet less. There's less deformation on the bullet, a little more consistency. Some other pretty simple features of the gun is that it does have a bolt lock open. Pull back on it and push the charging handle here in. It will lock the action open. Just pull up on it and it will go back forward. Later models in mid 80s, like 85 or something like that, it had a last round hold open, which would hold it open about halfway. This gun does not. This is an earlier production model. It also is a 22-inch barrel, 18-round capacity magazine tube that they changed in the late 90s down to a 15-round magazine to comply with some New Jersey laws. The tube-fed guns like this, whether they're lever action or semi-automatic or whatever, none of that really, in the '94 assault weapons ban, didn't affect these tube-fed magazine tube-fed guns, magazines, and semi-automatic because they were specifically excluded in the ban. So there was a time period that the really, I guess, more collectible, people look for them more, is the ones from the mid-80s to '89 where it had the bolt open and the 18-round magazine tube. In the early 2000s, they shortened the barrel from 22 inches to 19 inches to match the length of the magazine tube here, so it didn't look quite as funky. Nothing has really changed on these guns, very, very few parts. So everything from the current production models to the 1960 model are almost completely interchangeable parts-wise. So parts are just so readily available. They're all over the place. You can get just about anything you want for it. There are a few parts that were changed on them. I want to say the firing pin, the feed throat, and your magazine tubes are the only thing that are different in these. That's really it. As far as disassembly, real simple. Your action screw here And back here, when you pull this thing apart, the trigger group will stay in the gun and everything else lifts out on it. Stock lifts off because of this other screw here. Obviously the trigger group stays in there, and that's just your trigger and a little spring in there, and then your safety. No big deal. The basic disassembly, there's 2 screws up here and 2 screws back here, and the screw back here is actually, it's got one little one. The other one's more of a pin than it is a screw. And that comes out, and then this other piece here will push out. On the back side. And they can be quite tight sometimes. I'll loosen these up here and take them out, and that'll probably pop right out for us. There's that guy. This is your trigger group. We'll go over this here in a second. Pulling the bolt out here, pull back and lift up with your finger there. Charging handle comes out, bolt comes out, spring and guide rod there. The bolt, everything in here is just a bunch of pins that hold everything in. Your extractors and ejectors here are held in by pins at the top. Same thing with your firing pin and its spring, held in by a pin here. It comes out. Don't mess with that unless you have to replace the firing pin or anything like that. It's a free float, so there is no spring. Apologize for that. That's all there is inside of this action. Your recoil, or your guide rod for your recoil spring goes in right here, and that's your stripped action. The trigger assembly is relatively easy. There's just a bunch of little parts in there. The best way to start with this is this little guy right here. You can see that wire. That's actually the ejector wire, is to lift it up and out. And then the same spring here runs your lifter, and I use this little pickle fork grind screwdriver and push in there and push that leg out so this thing kind of floats around there. The other thing you want to get is just a little paper clip and hook it right in that little hole there, and hold on to your hammer, which is this guy right here, with your finger, and you can push your disconnector, which will activate the sear. So now your hammer is unsprung. And start with this side here. I don't know if you can, there's a big pin here that holds that big spring, but it doesn't go all the way across, so start with that side down just so things don't fall apart on you. There's a couple of E-clips that hold this all together. This particular gun's missing one. I've got some that I'm going to replace here. But just take your E-clip and pop it off there, and don't lose those guys. And this side plate here will just lift up and off of it. And from here you can take your feed ramp and your lifter out. You can take your lifter spring and ejector there, your buffer, and there's also a little spring for your sear. This little guy right here is your sear. take that spring and you can lift it up and off, and that will come with its spring, and your sear will come out of there. And then your hammer, strut, spring, and strut plate will come out of there. And then you've got, the only thing left is your disconnector and disconnector spring. And that spring just rides in the little hole here for the disconnector, and this little hole here on the plate, which goes through here. It's just an E-clip that holds this disconnector out of this side, so if you need to pull it out for any reason. And that's it. That is your basic disassembly for your Marlin Model 60, Glenfield Model 60, the same gun. Reassembly is just reverse order. Take your hammer, put it back on there. Take your sear with the hook facing backwards, and your spring, just set it in there and put it back down over the pin like so, and make sure it's seated. At that point you can run the sear spring leg back over that pin there. Cartridge guide, spring, and ejector, your buffer, your lifter, take that and just slide that back in there and set that back in, or, excuse me, that pin. Doy. And take your plate and set it back on there. Aligning those pins will probably be the hardest part of this whole thing, but it should be pretty simple. Let it pop right back on there. And we'll get our little E-clip. And we'll set it on there. I'll get another E-clip here and we'll put that guy back on there. I had to order some. I'm out of these particular ones, but just push it back on them like so, so it snaps in. Now you can take the cartridge guide spring and push it back down underneath so that leg hooks onto it. So it should be hooked onto the bottom, just like so. Now you can cock your hammer back while you're holding on to it, pull your little paper clip out, and there you go. Going back to the action here, recoil spring and guide rod. Stick the end of that down there in its little recess and just kind of hold it and get that guide rod to go back in there. And you can hold that, put your charging handle underneath there and let it slide back into place, and then we'll put that back together. Get that to pop back in that. Put that screw back in there. Real quick too, I was having trouble there. I had the buffer end backwards, so your little the slant here needs to be facing in that orientation. That's what was giving me trouble there. So simple little mistake. These front screws in, and we'll tighten her down. These things don't have to be on there real snug, just good and tight. And then from there, I'll just put the stock back on, like so. I'm not going to torque these things or tighten them up real solid. I got to go back in there and put that other E-clip on. So that's your magazine tube, your inner magazine tube. Stick it back in there, and there we go. That's all there is to it, man. Great little rifles, extremely accurate. Not a lot of aftermarket support on them. Like I said, the 1022s and stuff have all kinds of things, some of the other guns, but this doesn't really have a whole lot. That feed lip piece that we took out, that is replaced on the 795s with the external box magazine. They take the tube away basically in that thing, and they just stick it in there. Really simple guns, really accurate, a lot of fun. I've had one before I sold to a buddy, so him and his kid could go shooting, and just excellent guns. They're all over the place. You can find them pretty cheap. I think they're new. They're about $200. So yeah, great little guns, man. Thanks for watching, guys. Give me a thumbs up, a like, a share, and stay tuned. We'll be coming up with some more stuff here.